Genealogies in the Bible are more than just lists of names. To the modern reader, they might appear tedious, but to the people of ancient Israel, they were of immense importance. They were records of identity, history, and most importantly, God's faithfulness. They traced the unfolding of God's promises through the generations and demonstrated how He remained committed to His covenant despite human flaws and failures. When we come to the genealogy of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, this list becomes even more significant because it is not just a record of ancestry, it is a declaration of God's redemption plan unfolding through history. This genealogy serves as a testimony of how God's promises were fulfilled over centuries. The names included in such a list are meant to highlight key figures, individuals who represent the continuity of a divine lineage. Traditionally, genealogies focused on fathers and sons in each generation, reflecting the patriarchal structure of ancient society. However, the genealogy of Jesus also breaks convention by including unexpected names, underscoring the inclusiveness of God's plan. It's precisely for this reason that the inclusion of 5 women in the genealogy of Jesus stands out as unusual, if not astonishing. In a time when genealogies primarily focused on men, the presence of these women is remarkable. These women are not merely added as side notes or afterthoughts. They are central figures whose stories play a crucial role in God's plan. Their inclusion is not accidental, but an intentional highlight of God's grace and sovereignty. Each woman represents a key aspect of God's redemption, demonstrating that His plan transcends societal norms and expectations, focusing on the transformative power of His grace. Why would the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah include these women when most other genealogies omitted women entirely? This deliberate inclusion sends a profound message. In a cultural context where women were often marginalized and overlooked, their presence in Jesus' lineage communicates that God's purposes transcend human traditions and limitations. Their inclusion reveals that God does not evaluate individuals based on societal norms, gender roles, or cultural expectations. Instead, He sees each person as integral to His intricate redemptive plan, highlighting that His grace is available to all, regardless of status or background. It's a reminder that God values and elevates those whom society might dismiss, using them as key players in His unfolding story of salvation. The very fact that these women are highlighted speaks volumes about the kind of people God chooses to work through. Their inclusion in this genealogy is a powerful declaration that God's mercy and grace extend far beyond cultural boundaries, moral shortcomings, and societal status. These women, each with unique backgrounds and challenges, represent the limitless reach of God's redemptive power. Their stories are a testament to how God brings dignity to those who are despised, hope to the hopeless, and purpose to those whom society has overlooked or marginalized. Through them, we see that God delights in using the unexpected to fulfill His divine purposes, proving that no one is beyond the reach of His grace. When we examine this list carefully, we notice a deliberate pattern. God's kingdom is not shaped by human merit, but by His grace. In His grace, He often chooses the unlikely, the weak, and sometimes the broken to demonstrate His power and love. What's even more striking about these women is that they don't fit the typical mold of what society might consider ideal or righteous. Each of them carries a story marked by tension, struggle, and in some cases, controversy. Yet, these very challenges are what highlight God's ability to redeem and transform lives. Their inclusion in the lineage of Jesus showcases that God's plan is far more profound than societal expectations. It's about grace triumphing over human weakness, using imperfect people to achieve His perfect will. Their presence raises important questions and encourages us to look more closely at the nature of God's work. What we find is that God did not avoid including complex and at times morally challenging narratives in the lineage of His Son. Why is this significant? Because redemption is all about turning the messy into something meaningful. These women's stories, with all their struggles and imperfections, are purposefully woven into the genealogy of Jesus to show that God's grace is both surprising and far-reaching. Their inclusion serves as a powerful reminder that God's grace isn't confined to the ideal or perfect, but extends to all, regardless of their past, demonstrating that transformation is at the heart of His redemptive plan. In studying the genealogy of Jesus, we uncover a beautiful portrait of God's redemptive work through imperfect people. It reveals that no one is beyond his reach, and our backgrounds, no matter how complex or checkered, do not disqualify us from being part of his plan. In fact, it is often within these very complexities that God's grace shines the brightest. The stories of those in Jesus' lineage demonstrate that God delights in using flawed individuals to accomplish his purposes, transforming brokenness into beauty. Through this, we are reminded that his grace is not limited by our past, but magnified through it, showcasing his power to redeem and renew. The inclusion of these women is a powerful reminder that God's story is not sanitized for comfort or made to fit neatly within societal norms. It's a story that embraces real people with real struggles, failures, and faith. Their presence in Jesus' genealogy challenges and shatters many traditional expectations. These women were not warriors, kings, or high priests. They had little social influence and often found themselves in vulnerable and marginalized positions. Yet, these are the very names we find in the lineage of the King of Kings. Their inclusion reveals that God's criteria for significance are vastly different from those of the world, highlighting how he values faith and resilience over status or power. It's a testament to how God exalts the humble and uses the overlooked to bring about his greatest work. The presence of these 5 women in the genealogy of Jesus reveals God's value system in a profound way. He values faith over form, devotion over decorum, and heart over heritage. Where others may focus on external appearances or social standing, God looks beyond the surface and sees potential where others see problems. By choosing these women, God makes it abundantly clear that his salvation is not reserved for the esteemed, the powerful, or the privileged. It is for everyone, regardless of their position, past, or perceived flaws. Their stories remind us that God's grace reaches into every corner of humanity, lifting up those who might otherwise be overlooked and showing that faithfulness and a willing heart matter more to him than worldly status. Now, as we move forward, let's focus on these 5 remarkable women and explore what their inclusion in Jesus' genealogy reveals. This is far more than just a list of names. It's a rich tapestry of grace woven through the centuries, with each thread telling a unique story of faith, struggle, and redemption. These women represent God's deliberate choice to use the unexpected and the overlooked, ultimately leading to the birth of the Savior. Their stories remind us that God's grace is at work in every generation, transforming lives and bringing his divine plan to fruition in ways that surpass human understanding. The first of the 5 women mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus is Tamar. Her story is one of the most unusual and, at times, uncomfortable narratives in the Bible. It involves deception, betrayal, and unconventional actions that make it challenging to fully comprehend. Yet, despite its complexities, Tamar's story reveals profound lessons about faith, justice, and God's unexpected ways of bringing redemption. Tamar's name appears early in the genealogy, emphasizing that her role was crucial in the unfolding story of God's chosen people. Her determination to seek justice and secure her rightful place in the lineage is a testament to her faith and courage, showing that God can work through even the most difficult and controversial circumstances to fulfill his divine plan. To fully grasp Tamar's importance, we need to delve into her background and the circumstances that led to her extraordinary actions. Her story is found in Genesis 38, a chapter that at first glance may seem out of place, as it interrupts the larger narrative of Joseph, one of Jacob's sons. However, right in the midst of Joseph's saga, the focus shifts to Judah, another of Jacob's sons, and his complex relationship with Tamar. This sudden shift in the narrative highlights the significance of what unfolds in Tamar's life. Her story is woven into the broader narrative of Israel's history, showing that her role is pivotal to God's unfolding plan, despite the challenging and uncomfortable circumstances that surround her actions. Judah left his brothers and settled in a place called Adullam, where he married a Canaanite woman and started his own family. Tamar enters the story when Judah arranges for her to marry his firstborn son, Er. However, the marriage did not go as planned. The Bible tells us that Er was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and as a result of his wickedness, the Lord took his life. Tamar suddenly found herself widowed and without children, a vulnerable position in that culture where a woman's security was often tied to her husband and her ability to bear sons. This turn of events sets the stage for Tamar's subsequent actions, which would be unconventional yet deeply significant in the fulfillment of God's plan. Widowed and childless, Tamar was in a precarious position. In ancient Hebrew culture, a woman's value and security were closely tied to her role as a wife and mother. Without children or a husband, Tamar found herself vulnerable, lacking both protection and social status. According to the custom of Levirate marriage, which existed to protect widows and ensure the continuation of the deceased husband's lineage, it was Judah's responsibility to provide Tamar with another son to marry her. This custom would allow her to bear a child in her first husband's name, securing her place in the family and restoring her future. However, this duty would soon lead to complications, as Judah's actions didn't follow through with this custom as expected, ultimately prompting Tamar to take matters into her own hands. Judah instructed his second son, Onan, to marry Tamar and fulfill the Levirate duty of producing offspring for his late brother. However, Onan refused to carry out this responsibility. While he went through the motions of marriage, he deliberately prevented Tamar from conceiving by ensuring that no child would be born who could continue his brother's name. This act of defiance was not just against Tamar, but also against the cultural and familial obligation he was expected to fulfill. The Bible describes Onan's actions as evil in the sight of the Lord, and as a result, Onan too lost his life. Tamar, once again widowed and still childless, was left in an even more vulnerable and uncertain position, further complicating her already difficult circumstances. Now, Tamar had lost two husbands, both of whom had failed her in significant ways. At this point, Judah, instead of responding with compassion and fulfilling his obligations, reacted out of fear and suspicion. Having already lost two sons, Judah began to view Tamar as the source of the problem, rather than recognizing the wickedness of his sons. He feared that if he gave his youngest son, Shelah, to Tamar, he might lose him as well. So, instead of honoring the custom and his promise, Judah sent Tamar back to her father's house with a vague assurance that she would marry Shelah once he was older. This decision left Tamar in a state of uncertainty and isolation, as she had no guarantee that Judah would ever fulfill his word, and her future remained bleak without the protection of a husband or a son. Tamar, however, saw through Judah's intentions. She understood that Judah had no intention of keeping his promise, and that her future was filled with uncertainty. As a childless widow living in her father's home, Tamar faced a life of social isolation and insecurity, with little hope for restoration or stability. Yet, Tamar was not a passive victim. She demonstrated remarkable resolve and a keen understanding of her rights within her society. Recognizing that Judah had failed to uphold his responsibilities, Tamar took matters into her own hands. Her actions, though unconventional and risky, reveal her determination to secure her rightful place and protect her future, highlighting her strength and courage in the face of adversity. Tamar waited patiently, but as time passed and Shelah had grown up, it became clear that Judah had no intention of fulfilling his promise. Faced with a future of uncertainty and injustice, Tamar took bold and controversial action. Upon hearing that Judah was traveling to a nearby town to shear his sheep, Tamar devised a plan. She disguised herself by covering her face with a veil, concealing her identity, and positioned herself along the roadside where she knew Judah would pass. This daring move would set in motion a series of events that would not only restore her rightful place, but also significantly impact the unfolding of God's plan for his people. Tamar's actions, though unconventional and risky, underscore her resolve to seek justice and secure her future, even when society had failed to protect her rights. Believing her to be a prostitute, Judah approached Tamar, and they negotiated for her services. Tamar, however, had a specific plan in mind and requested a pledge from Judah in exchange, a significant one: his seal, cord, and staff. These items were not just valuable, but were symbols of Judah's identity and authority, representing his standing within the community. After their encounter, Tamar returned to her home, taking the pledge with her, while Judah continued on his way, entirely unaware that the woman he had been with was actually his own daughter-in-law. This encounter would soon bring about dramatic consequences, as Tamar's actions were not merely about securing an heir, but also about exposing the injustice done to her and reclaiming her rightful place in Judah's family. Later, when it was revealed that Tamar was pregnant, Judah reacted with the harsh, judgmental attitude typical of the time. Without knowing the full truth, he demanded that she be brought out and burned for her perceived immorality. This extreme response reflected the societal norms of the day, where women were often harshly punished for such transgressions. However, Tamar had anticipated this reaction. As she was being led out to face her punishment, she sent Judah's own seal, cord, and staff with a message: the man who owned these items was the father of her child. This bold revelation not only exposed Judah's hypocrisy, but also vindicated Tamar, demonstrating her cleverness and determination in seeking justice. Judah immediately recognized the truth and admitted, "She is more righteous than I," acknowledging his failure to fulfill his obligations to her. Confronted with undeniable evidence, Judah was forced to confront his own wrongdoing. He admitted, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." In this moment of humility, Judah recognized that Tamar's actions, though unconventional, were motivated by justice and a rightful claim to what had been denied her. Rather than acting out of immorality, Tamar sought to secure her place and uphold the Levite duty that Judah had failed to honor. This moment not only revealed Judah's failure, but also highlighted Tamar's strength and righteousness as she fought for her rights within a system that had neglected her. Through Tamar's persistence and courage, God brought about the birth of Perez, one of the key ancestors in the lineage of Jesus. Tamar's inclusion in Jesus' genealogy serves as a powerful reminder that God's plans are never thwarted by human failures or limited by social conventions. Her story illustrates that God looks beyond outward appearances and societal expectations, focusing instead on the heart and the faithfulness of those who trust in Him. Tamar's remarkable resolve demonstrates that even in the face of injustice and adversity, God can bring redemption and purpose, weaving even the most complex stories into His greater plan for salvation. The second woman mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus is Rahab, whose story is found in the book of Joshua. Her inclusion is truly remarkable because she was not an Israelite, but a Canaanite living in the city of Jericho, a city marked for destruction. Even more surprising is the fact that Rahab was identified as a prostitute, a detail that would have made her an outsider, not just to the Israelites, but within her own society as well. In the eyes of the Israelites, Rahab's background would have placed her far outside the realm of respectability or inclusion in God's plan. Yet, despite her social status and origins, Rahab's faith in God and her courageous actions would lead to her becoming an important figure in Israel's history and ultimately in the lineage of the Messiah. The story of Rahab begins as the Israelites are preparing to enter the Promised Land, with Jericho, a heavily fortified city, standing in their way. The people of Jericho had already heard about the Israelites' miraculous victories and the mighty power of their God, and fear spread throughout the city. Despite being a Canaanite and part of Jericho, Rahab recognized the truth about the God of Israel. She understood that the God of the Israelites was unlike the gods of her people and decided to act in faith. Rahab's decision to side with the Israelites, despite the danger it posed to her and her family, showed her deep conviction that the God of Israel was the true God, capable of delivering His people. This moment of faith would forever change her life and solidify her place in God's redemptive story. When two Israelite spies were sent to scout the city of Jericho, they found their way to Rahab's house, which was located along the city wall. Recognizing that these men were Israelites and knowing the power of their God, Rahab made a courageous choice. She decided to protect them from the king's soldiers, despite the great risk to her own life. Rahab hid the spies on her roof beneath bundles of flax and, when questioned by the soldiers, she lied, telling them that the men had already left the city. This bold act of courage not only put her life in jeopardy, but also demonstrated her unwavering faith in the God of Israel. Rahab's decision to shield the spies, rather than betray them, played a critical role in the unfolding of God's plan for the Israelites' conquest of Jericho. After the soldiers had left, Rahab went up to the spies and made a heartfelt request. She expressed her belief in the God of Israel, acknowledging his power and the fear he had instilled in the people of Jericho. She said, "I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you." Rahab's confession of faith was remarkable, as it showed her understanding of God's sovereignty even as a foreigner. She then asked the spies to spare her and her family when the Israelites attacked Jericho, trusting that God's mercy extended to those who put their faith in him. Her plea was not just for herself, but for her entire household, demonstrating both her bravery and her deep care for her loved ones amidst the coming destruction. The spies agreed to Rahab's request, giving her a crimson cord to hang in her window as a sign. This red cord would serve as a signal to the Israelites, indicating that everyone inside her home should be spared when they invaded the city. In a symbolic echo of the Passover lamb's blood that protected the Israelites from death in Egypt, Rahab's house, marked by the red cord, became a place of refuge and salvation. Just as the blood on the doorposts shielded the Israelites from judgment, the crimson cord identified Rahab's home as a safe haven amidst the destruction. Through this act of faith, Rahab and her family were not only spared from the fall of Jericho, but Rahab also became a part of Israel's community, further embedding her into the unfolding story of God's redemption. When the Israelites eventually destroyed Jericho, they honored their promise and spared Rahab and her family because of her faith. Rahab's story is one of remarkable transformation. Though she was once known as a prostitute and a foreigner in a doomed city, it was her faith in God that ultimately defined her. She trusted in the God of Israel and acted courageously, which not only saved her life, but also brought her into the very lineage of the Messiah. Rahab's transformation from a Canaanite prostitute to a revered ancestor of Jesus speaks powerfully of God's redemptive power. Her life is a testimony to how God can take anyone, regardless of their past, and weave them into his greater plan, showing that no one is beyond his grace and mercy. The inclusion of Rahab in Jesus' genealogy highlights a recurring and powerful theme in the Bible. God's grace is not limited to any particular group or type of person. Rahab was a Gentile, an outsider in every sense, and her profession as a prostitute was looked down upon by all cultures. Yet her story beautifully demonstrates that God looks beyond human labels, societal judgments, and outward appearances to see the heart of faith. It was Rahab's faith in the God of Israel, not her background or past, that secured her place in the lineage of Jesus. Her inclusion serves as a reminder that God's redemptive power reaches beyond boundaries, transforming lives and using the most unexpected individuals to accomplish his divine purposes. The third woman mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus is Ruth. Unlike Tamar and Rahab, whose stories are marked by moral complexities and difficult circumstances, Ruth's story is one of unwavering loyalty, faithfulness, and trust in God's providence. Ruth was not an Israelite by birth. She was a Moabitess, a foreigner from a people who were often at odds with Israel. Despite her foreign origins, Ruth's life became a radiant example of love, faith, and redemption. Her devotion to her mother-in-law, Naomi, and her decision to embrace Naomi's God and people set her apart as a woman of remarkable character. Through Ruth's faithfulness, God's providential care is clearly seen as her story unfolds into one of redemption, leading her to become the great-grandmother of King David and securing her place in the lineage of Jesus, the ultimate Redeemer. Ruth's story begins with deep tragedy. Her Israelite husband died, leaving her a widow in a foreign land. Her mother-in-law, Naomi had also experienced immense loss, as both her husband and her two sons had passed away, leaving the family without any male relatives to provide for them. Faced with the harsh reality of being widows in a patriarchal society, Naomi decided to return to her homeland in Bethlehem, hoping to find some form of security among her own people. Before leaving, she urged Ruth and her other daughter-in-law, Orpah, to stay behind in Moab and rebuild their lives. Naomi believed that staying in Moab would give them the best chance to remarry and find stability, as she could offer them no future if they followed her. This moment set the stage for Ruth's extraordinary decision, which would change her life and align her with God's redemptive plan. But Ruth refused to leave Naomi's side, displaying remarkable loyalty and love. In one of the most famous and heartfelt declarations in the Bible, Ruth said, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God." This profound statement of commitment highlighted Ruth's extraordinary character. She willingly chose to leave behind her homeland, her family, and the familiarity of Moab, embracing an uncertain future in a foreign land. Ruth's decision to stay with Naomi, fully aware that it might lead to hardship and rejection, demonstrated not only her loyalty to Naomi, but also her faith in Naomi's God. Her courageous choice set her apart as a woman of faith, paving the way for her to play a key role in God's redemptive plan for Israel. The two women returned to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. In their vulnerable state, Ruth took the initiative to support both herself and Naomi by going out to glean in the fields, a practice that allowed the poor to collect leftover grain after the harvesters. By divine providence, Ruth found herself gleaning in the fields of Boaz, a wealthy and influential relative of Naomi's deceased husband. Boaz had already heard of Ruth's loyalty and kindness toward Naomi, and he was deeply impressed by her dedication and selflessness. Moved by her reputation and the grace she showed in caring for Naomi, Boaz ensured that Ruth would be protected and provided for while she worked in his fields. This encounter was the beginning of a significant chapter in Ruth's life, one that would lead to her becoming part of God's larger plan of redemption. Boaz, moved by Ruth's loyalty and character, instructed his workers to treat her with respect and even made sure that extra grain was left for her to gather. This act of kindness went beyond mere generosity. It was a reflection of Boaz's deep compassion and respect for Ruth. Over time, this kindness blossomed into a deeper relationship between Ruth and Boaz. Naomi, recognizing this growing bond and understanding the cultural customs, saw an opportunity for redemption. She encouraged Ruth to approach Boaz as a kinsman redeemer, someone who had the right to marry Ruth and restore the family line of her late husband, Mahlon. This role of kinsman redeemer was crucial in preserving family heritage and property within Israelite culture, and Naomi knew that Boaz could be the one to secure their future. Following Naomi's guidance, Ruth took a bold step of faith, placing her trust in both Boaz and God's providence. Ruth's faithfulness and Boaz's kindness culminated in their marriage, a union that was richly blessed with the birth of a son named Obed. Obed would go on to become the grandfather of King David, one of the most pivotal figures in Israel's history and a key part of God's unfolding plan of redemption. Through Ruth's loyalty and Boaz's compassion, God not only provided for Naomi, restoring her hope and family, but also advanced his greater purpose for the entire nation of Israel. Ruth's story stands as a testament to how God uses ordinary people, even those from humble or foreign beginnings, to fulfill extraordinary roles in his divine plan. Her inclusion in the lineage of Jesus emphasizes that God values faith and character above all else, bringing about redemption through unexpected and often surprising means. Ruth's inclusion in Jesus' genealogy is a powerful reminder that God's grace transcends nationality, status, or background. Despite being a Moabite and a widow, Ruth's story highlights that God's redemptive plan is open to all who place their trust in him. Her unwavering loyalty to Naomi, her faith in God, and the way he provided for her through Boaz demonstrate that anyone, regardless of their origins or circumstances, can become a vital part of God's divine purpose. Ruth's life stands as a beacon of hope, showing that God's grace reaches beyond boundaries and embraces those who seek Him with faith and devotion. The fourth woman mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus is Bathsheba, though she is referred to simply as the wife of Uriah. Her story is deeply intertwined with King David, one of the most revered figures in the Old Testament, yet it is also a narrative marked by brokenness, betrayal, and the far-reaching consequences of sin. Bathsheba was married to Uriah, a loyal soldier in David's army, but her life took a tragic turn when David, seeing her from his palace roof, summoned her, leading to an adulterous affair. This encounter would result in Bathsheba becoming pregnant, and in an attempt to cover up his wrongdoing, David orchestrated Uriah's death in battle. Bathsheba's story, while painful and filled with moral failure, ultimately becomes part of God's redemptive plan, as she would later become the mother of Solomon, one of Israel's greatest kings and a direct ancestor of Jesus. Bathsheba's story begins when King David, from the roof of his palace, saw her bathing. Despite knowing that she was the wife of Uriah, one of his most loyal soldiers, David allowed his desire to overtake his judgment. He summoned Bathsheba to his palace, and they had an affair. In time, Bathsheba discovered that she was pregnant, which created a serious problem. Since her husband Uriah was away fighting in David's army, it was impossible to conceal the paternity of the child. This led David to devise a series of increasingly desperate actions to cover up the affair, setting the stage for a tragic chain of events that would not only impact David and Bathsheba, but also their family and the entire kingdom. Faced with the unexpected pregnancy, Bathsheba sent word to David, seeking his help. What followed was a series of desperate and increasingly tragic attempts by David to cover up his sin. First, David summoned Uriah from the battlefield, hoping that he would go home to Bathsheba and be with her, which would make it appear as though the child was his. However, Uriah, demonstrating his deep sense of loyalty and honor, refused to enjoy the comforts of home while his fellow soldiers were still in harm's way on the battlefield. He stayed with the king's servants instead, showing his commitment to his comrades, unknowingly foiling David's initial plan to conceal the affair. This act of loyalty highlighted the stark contrast between Uriah's integrity and David's moral failing, setting the stage for the drastic steps David would take next. When David's initial plan to cover up the affair failed, he resorted to a much darker and more tragic scheme. He sent Uriah back to the battlefield, carrying orders for his own death. David instructed his commander, Joab, to place Uriah at the front lines, where the fighting was the most intense, and then withdraw the other soldiers so that Uriah would be left exposed. As David had intended, Uriah was killed in battle. After receiving the news of Uriah's death, David quickly took Bathsheba as his wife, and she gave birth to their son. However, while David may have thought he had successfully covered up the affair, the consequences of his actions would soon come to light, as God was deeply displeased with the deception, betrayal, and loss of life caused by David's sin. This event marked a turning point in both David's life and Bathsheba's story, yet even in the midst of such brokenness, God's redemptive plan continued to unfold. However, God was deeply displeased with David's actions, and he sent the prophet Nathan to confront him. Nathan told David a parable about a rich man who unjustly took a poor man's only lamb, even though he had plenty of his own. This story struck a chord with David, and he was outraged at the injustice, declaring that the rich man deserved to be punished. Nathan then revealed that David was the man in the parable, opening David's eyes to the gravity of his sin. Upon realizing his guilt, David repented before God, acknowledging the depth of his wrongdoing. Despite his sincere repentance, the consequences of his actions could not be avoided. As a result of David's sin, the child born to him and Bathsheba became ill and died shortly after birth. This loss was a painful reminder of the lasting effects of David's choices, yet it also marked a turning point in his relationship with God, as he sought forgiveness and continued to rely on God's mercy. Despite the tragic beginning of their relationship, Bathsheba's story did not end in despair. After the death of their first child, She went on to bear another son, Solomon, who would later become one of Israel's greatest kings. Bathsheba played a crucial role in securing Solomon's place on the throne. As David grew old and frail, a power struggle emerged over who would succeed him, with one of David's other sons, Adonijah, attempting to claim the throne. Bathsheba, with the support of the prophet Nathan, intervened at this critical moment. She reminded David of his promise that Solomon would be king, urging him to fulfill his word. Her decisive action helped ensure that Solomon ascended to the throne, preserving David's legacy and fulfilling God's plan. Bathsheba's wisdom and influence were instrumental in shaping Israel's future, highlighting how God can bring redemption and purpose even through the most difficult and complex situations. Through her actions, Bathsheba demonstrated remarkable wisdom, resilience, and faith in God's plan. Despite the scandal and sorrow that had marked the early part of her life, she emerged as a pivotal figure, becoming the mother of Solomon, the wisest and wealthiest king in Israel's history. Bathsheba's inclusion in the genealogy of Jesus serves as a profound reminder of God's ability to bring about redemption, even in situations marred by sin and brokenness. Her story highlights how God can transform lives and use imperfect people to fulfill his divine purposes, showcasing his grace and mercy that extend beyond human failings. The fifth and final woman mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus is Mary, the mother of Jesus. Unlike the other women, Mary's story is not marked by scandal or controversy, but it is just as extraordinary. Mary was a young, humble girl from Nazareth, a small and insignificant village in Galilee. She had no reputation, wealth, or social standing, yet God chose her for the greatest honor in history, to be the mother of the Messiah. Despite her humble circumstances, Mary was highly favored by God, and her willingness to accept his plan with faith and obedience stands as a testament to her remarkable character. Her story exemplifies how God often chooses the humble and lowly to accomplish his greatest works, showing that true significance comes from being aligned with God's will. Gabriel explained that the Holy Spirit would come upon Mary and the power of the Most High would overshadow her, resulting in the miraculous conception of the Son of God. Faced with this overwhelming and unexpected news, Mary's response was simple yet profound. "I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled." Her willingness to fully submit to God's will, despite the risks, uncertainties, and potential societal judgment, reveals the depth of her character and faith. Mary, a young woman from a humble background, embraced her role in God's redemptive plan with grace and courage, trusting in God's purpose even when the path ahead was unclear. Her faithfulness set the stage for the birth of the Savior, demonstrating that God often works through those who are willing to surrender to his plan, no matter the cost. Mary's life was filled with awe and wonder, but also many challenges. She witnessed the miraculous birth of Jesus, the visit of shepherds who spoke of angels, and the arrival of wise men from the east. However, she also endured hardship, fleeing to Egypt to escape King Herod's decree. Later, she would watch her son be rejected, crucified, and buried. Despite these trials, Mary remained faithful, trusting in God's plan through it all. However, Mary's faith never wavered. She witnessed the resurrection of Jesus, the fulfillment of every promise, and the ultimate triumph of God's redemption plan. Through all the trials and uncertainties, her steadfast belief remained strong. Her life serves as a testament to humility, unwavering faith, and complete trust in God's purpose, no matter the personal cost. Mary's inclusion in Jesus' genealogy reminds us that God's greatest plans often begin with simple, humble obedience, and that he uses those with open hearts to accomplish his divine will. Her story shows how profound impact can arise from those willing to submit to God's will, even in the face of great difficulty. These 5 women, Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary, each have unique and powerful stories that highlight God's grace, mercy, and redemption. Despite the challenges, scandals, or humble beginnings they faced, their lives show us that God can use anyone, no matter their past or circumstances, to fulfill his divine purpose. Their inclusion in the lineage of Jesus is a bold declaration that God's kingdom is not limited by human traditions, cultural norms, or social expectations. Instead, it is shaped by faith, obedience, and the power of God's redemptive work through those who trust in Him. Their stories remind us that God's plans often defy societal expectations, bringing forth hope and salvation from the most unexpected places. The lives of these women illustrate that God's ways are not our ways. He often chooses the unlikely, the weak, and even the broken to accomplish His greatest plans. Their stories remind us that faith, courage, and a willingness to surrender to God's will are what truly shape a lasting legacy. Through Tamar's boldness, Rahab's faith, Ruth's loyalty, Bathsheba's resilience, and Mary's humility, we see that God values the heart and the willingness to trust Him over societal expectations or human strength. Their lives are a testament to how God's grace can transform and use anyone for His divine purposes. So, what about you? Perhaps there are areas in your life where you feel unworthy or insignificant, thinking that your story doesn't matter. Or maybe you faced pain, rejection, or moments of failure. But remember, God delights in using those very situations to showcase His grace and strength. Just as He did with Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary, He can use you in ways you never imagined. Your past or present circumstances do not disqualify you from being part of His greater plan. In fact, it's often through those very challenges that God works most powerfully, shaping your story into one of redemption, hope, and purpose. Trust that He sees your potential and can bring about something beautiful, no matter where you are in life. The stories of Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary are powerful examples of God's ability to bring redemption through unexpected individuals and challenging circumstances. Each of these women faced trials, adversity, and, at times, societal rejection, yet their faith and courage allowed God's purpose to unfold through their lives. Tamar's boldness, Rahab's unwavering trust, Ruth's loyalty, Bathsheba's resilience, and Mary's humility all reflect how God can transform difficult situations into opportunities for His grace to shine. Their presence in the genealogy of Jesus is a testament to God's intricate weaving of grace, demonstrating that even the most challenging experiences can lead to profound redemptive outcomes in His divine plan. Through their lives, we see that God's love and purpose are often found in the unlikeliest of places, reminding us that He can work through anyone who is willing to trust Him. From Tamar's boldness in fighting for justice to Rahab's courage in acting on faith, from Ruth's unwavering loyalty and trust in God's providence to Bathsheba's resilience in the face of great personal loss, and finally to Mary's humble obedience to God's call. Each story reflects a unique facet of God's redemptive power. These women exemplify that faith is not about perfection or having everything figured out, but about trusting in God's plans, even when the path ahead is unclear. Their lives remind us that God can work through our imperfections and uncertainties, using our willingness to follow Him as a catalyst for His greater purpose. Through their stories, we see that God's grace is powerful enough to transform our lives and the lives of others, revealing His love and redemption in extraordinary ways. Their lives teach us that no one is beyond God's reach, and no situation is too far gone for His grace to redeem. Whether through acts of courage, loyalty, faithfulness, or humility, God can use every moment of our lives for His purpose. These 5 women are central figures in the genealogy of Jesus, not because of their perfection, but because of their unwavering faith and willingness to be part of God's divine plan. Their stories remind us that God values our hearts and our responses to His call, illustrating that it is through our trust and surrender that we become instruments of His grace. In their journeys, we find hope and encouragement, knowing that God can transform our lives and use us to fulfill His greater purpose. As we reflect on their stories, let us be encouraged that God's grace is available to all of us, regardless of our backgrounds or past mistakes. His plans often differ from what society values or expects, yet they are always filled with grace, redemption, and purpose. The inclusion of these women in the lineage of the Messiah serves as a powerful reminder that God works through all people, from all walks of life, to accomplish His greater plan. Their diverse experiences highlight that anyone, no matter their circumstances, can be a vessel for God's purpose. Through faith and willingness to follow Him, we too can participate in the unfolding of His redemptive story, knowing that our lives can have a profound impact in ways we may not yet understand. In closing, remember this: God's kingdom is built on grace, not human merit. Just as He used these 5 remarkable women to bring about the birth of the Savior, He can use you, no matter your story, to fulfill His purposes. Embrace the complexities of your life, trust in His plan, and allow His grace to work through you, just as He did through Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary. Each of their lives is a testament to the transformative power of faith and surrender, reminding us that our backgrounds and experiences can be the very tools God uses to shape His narrative of redemption. So, step forward in faith, knowing that you are part of His incredible story. As we now turn our attention to the 5 remarkable women in Jesus' genealogy, let's begin with Tamar, whose story illustrates how God brings justice and redemption through seemingly impossible situations. Her boldness and determination to claim what was rightfully hers not only highlighted her strength, but also paved the way for the birth of Perez, an important ancestor of Jesus. Tamar's inclusion in this lineage serves as a powerful reminder that God's purposes are often fulfilled in ways that challenge societal norms and expectations. Her actions defy the conventions of her time, showcasing that God can use the courage of those deemed outsiders to achieve His divine plan, ultimately emphasizing that true justice and redemption can emerge from the most difficult circumstances. Next is Rahab, a Canaanite woman who acted with remarkable faith and courage by sheltering the Israelite spies and helping them escape from danger. Her belief in the God of Israel and her willingness to trust Him led to the salvation of her entire family when Jericho fell. Despite her past as a prostitute, Rahab became an honored part of the lineage of Jesus, demonstrating that no one is beyond redemption when they place their faith in God. Her story emphasizes that God's grace can transform lives and that He often chooses unexpected individuals to fulfill His divine purposes. Rahab's inclusion in Jesus' genealogy serves as a powerful reminder that true faith can lead to profound change, offering hope to all who seek it. Then we have Ruth, a Moabite woman renowned for her unwavering loyalty to her mother-in-law, Naomi. In a remarkable act of devotion, Ruth left behind her homeland and her people to follow Naomi to Bethlehem, placing her trust in the God of Israel. Her story embodies themes of loyalty, faithfulness, and divine provision, as her union with Boaz resulted in the birth of Obed, the grandfather of King David. Ruth's inclusion in the genealogy of Jesus illustrates that God's grace extends far beyond national or cultural boundaries, emphasizing that faith and commitment can lead to extraordinary blessings. Her journey serves as a testament to how God honors those who faithfully seek Him, regardless of their origins. Following Ruth is Bathsheba, whose story is marked by tragedy and scandal. Despite the moral failures of King David and the tumultuous circumstances surrounding her life, Bathsheba's story ultimately reflects the transformative power of God's grace. She became the mother of Solomon, one of Israel's greatest kings, and her life was redeemed through this divine purpose. Bathsheba's inclusion in Jesus' genealogy highlights how God's mercy can turn even the darkest situations into opportunities for renewal and purpose. Her journey serves as a reminder that, regardless of past mistakes or difficult circumstances, God can bring about redemption and fulfill His promises, showcasing the depth of His grace in the lives of those who seek Him. Lastly, we have Mary, the mother of Jesus. Chosen by God for the most significant role in history, Mary's humility and obedience enabled her to carry and raise the Savior of the world. From the moment of the angel Gabriel's announcement, she responded with faith, demonstrating a willingness to accept God's plan despite the uncertainties and challenges it brought. Mary's journey, culminating in her witnessing Jesus' resurrection, serves as an enduring example of trusting in God's plan, no matter the cost. Her life illustrates that true faith often involves surrender and courage, reminding us that God can use ordinary individuals to fulfill His extraordinary purposes. Mary's inclusion in Jesus' genealogy emphasizes the power of faith and obedience in shaping God's redemptive story. The inclusion of these 5 women in the genealogy of Jesus reveals God's heart for all people, regardless of their background, gender, or social status. Each of them played a critical role in the unfolding of God's redemption plan, demonstrating that His grace is available to everyone, no matter their past or struggles. Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary each faced unique challenges, yet their faith and courage allowed them to participate in God's divine purpose. Their stories remind us that God does not discriminate based on human standards. Instead, He embraces those who are willing to trust Him. This powerful message of inclusivity encourages us to remember that no one is beyond the reach of God's love and redemption, and that our lives can contribute to His greater story of grace. These women remind us that God's purposes transcend human expectations and societal norms. He does not judge by outward appearances, but by the heart. In a world that often prioritizes power, status, and perfection, God values faith, devotion, and a willingness to follow His calling. The lives of Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary challenge us to see ourselves as God sees us, worthy of His grace and integral to His divine story. Their examples inspire us to embrace our own journeys, recognizing that our backgrounds or imperfections do not disqualify us from being used by God. Instead, they affirm that God can transform our lives and weave our stories into His greater narrative of redemption and hope. So, as you reflect on their stories, consider how God might be working in your life, even during moments of brokenness or uncertainty. Remember, just as He used these 5 remarkable women to bring about the birth of the Savior, He can also use you to fulfill His purposes, regardless of your background or past mistakes. God's grace is always greater than our shortcomings, and His plans are far deeper and more intricate than we can ever imagine. Embrace the journey of faith, knowing that your story is still being written and that God can bring beauty and purpose from your experiences. Trust in His love and guidance, and be open to the incredible ways He may choose to work through you.